Hello, and welcome everyone. It's absolutely great to be here for another of our How a Coach Can Help Me series. It's just wonderful to be able to share this series with you. But before we do feel free to say hello in the chat, because we always like to know where in the world you're logging in from and who you are, of course. And it doesn't show up unless you type in the chat. So let me have a look. Is anyone sending us any messages about where they are, or do I need to leave it a few more minutes? Well, I can see Tanya's put a message in the chat, so please do feel free to respond to her. So I'm Jenny Garrett. I want to welcome you to in the series, How a Coach Can Help Me Lead My Team so they just get on with it. Of course, we need to nurture and develop our teams, but sometimes also we want our team members to be autonomous, to be able to take action and be proactive. So that's what we'll be talking about today. A little bit about me. As I've said, my name is Jenny Garrett. I've been coaching for 20 years now. I run my own leadership consultancy, and we work across 3 areas: inclusive leadership, entrepreneurial leadership within an organization, and AI-ready leadership. Because whether we like it or not, that is where the world is heading, and leaders need to be prepared. I'm also founder of the Diverse Executive Coach Directory, which is where our 2 brilliant guests come from today. I set it up to solve a problem I kept seeing: organizations wanting to work with coaches from diverse backgrounds, but not knowing where to find them. So we created the directory to increase visibility for talented coaches from global majority, or you might use the language, ethnically diverse backgrounds. My latest book, or my most recent book, is called Equality versus Equity. And it won an award last year, and it tackles the topic of race in the workplace in a really practical way. Before we dive in, I want to say a huge thank you on behalf of Rocking Your Teens, the social enterprise we're supporting today. Every donation goes directly towards building resilience and raising aspirations in teenagers. And if you want to know more about Rocking Your Teens, please do go to the website. Tanya will pop the link in the chat. So today's topic: be honest. How much of your day is spent chasing updates, checking work, or just doing things yourself because it's quicker? If you're nodding, you're not alone. Research in the International Journal of Economics and Business Administration confirms effective delegation boosts team performance, job satisfaction, and autonomy. We know this, but knowing it doesn't make it any easier to actually let go. So today we're going to explore why letting go can feel so hard, how to delegate in a way that actually develops people rather than just offloading your tasks that you don't want to do, how to build a culture where people step up without being asked, and what it really means to lead like a coach. As I said, I'm absolutely delighted to have 2 brilliant coaches with me who both bring something different to this conversation. They're members of the Diverse Executive Coach Directory, and Tanya will pop their links in the chat now. Please do connect with them, follow them, have a chemistry session with them after this conversation. So the format of our conversation today: Sohini and Ola will introduce themselves briefly. Then I'll ask them some questions. And after that, we'll open up to you for your questions. And we'll be keeping an eye on the chat throughout. So do share your thoughts, your insights, your questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So let's meet our guests. Sohini, can we start with you? Please tell us a bit about yourself and your work.
Thanks, Jenny. It's lovely to be here with you and with Ola as well. Hi, everyone. I am Suhini Petri, and I'm founder of Harikoa, which is a leadership development and team coaching practice based in Glasgow. I work with leaders and teams in complex, high-pressure environments, and that's across sectors, really. The corporate, public sector, and the nonprofit world as well. And well-being is at the heart of everything that I do. And so what that means in practice is that we get to the core of things that deeply affect us in the workplace in our coaching sessions. Things like power dynamics, stress, unrealistic expectations, perfectionism, ADHD, which I'm seeing more and more come through with my clients. And of course, the added challenges of being a global majority leader in predominantly white spaces. So what shapes the work, how I work, is positive psychology, being trauma informed and anti-oppressive trained, because it offers crucial perspectives in how we get to a true sense of well-being when we're navigating complexity, difference, and pressure all at once. So as leaders, we need to understand ourselves really well and take care of ourselves really well so we can lead effectively and build these strong, empowered teams. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you so much. Great to hear from you, and really interesting. I was at a session about the future of work last night, and well-being was coming up really strongly as so important for the future of work, so important for human resources professionals to be thinking about in the new workplace. So great to hear it's central to your work alongside so much other expertise. I'd love to hear from Ola as well. Please, we'd like to hear a bit more about you and what you bring.
Hi everyone, delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Ola. I'm a leadership coach. I'm also a program manager, and I'm a qualified nutritionist. I've managed multi-million-pound programs across borders, mainly in highly regulated environments for, more than 3 decades. A bit too long, but my coaching career is more recent. I've been a qualified coach since 2020, and in that time, I've clocked hundreds of hours working with leaders who are perhaps unsure or usually under pressure or sometimes looking for change. And the work I do with them really is to allow them to really express what's going on a bit deeper inside, to find space for themselves, to actually concentrate on themselves, because a lot of the time, especially with the female leaders that I work with, they have been so busy doing for everybody else that finding time for themselves, it seems, it's not on the list at all, let alone at the bottom of the list. So actually giving them space to find that time is part of what I do. That said, the ability to delegate effectively comes up in a lot of the conversations that I have with many of these leaders. So I am delighted to be here to share some of the insight that I've gained in talking to these people. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to hear what you're up to and what you bring. And I love the holistic nature of the coaching that you both bring. You're kind of thinking about the body, the mind, the spirit, all of it, and the system when you're thinking about your coaching. So I'm looking forward to digging into the questions. I want to say hello to Rose from London. Thank you very much for saying hi in the chat. And everyone else watching, please do feel free to say hello, because we can't tell you're there unless you do. So thank you so much. So I want to go to my first question, and it's to you, Ola. You've spent nearly 3 decades in this work in financial services, running multi-million-pound change programs. So the pressure senior leaders are under. You talk about grounded strength under pressure and helping leaders navigate uncertainty without absorbing all the stress themselves. When you work with leaders who are doing everything themselves, checking people's work, chasing updates, really finding it difficult to delegate, what's usually going on beneath the surface? what are the fears and the habits that keep them holding on? I'd like to understand that better.
Yes, it's interesting that you use the word fear as part of your question, because underneath that drive for control is usually a fear. Many of the leaders I work with, they talk about fear that things will get missed, fear of mistakes getting reflected back on them. But one very interesting fear that comes up after a lot of digging usually is the fear of not being needed. Typically, there's quite an overhang from their early career where being an expert was what gained recognition. And therefore, there's a fear of letting go of that feeling of being the expert. But as a senior leader, detailed expertise is not what's needed, it's not what's required. What's required is usually the space to come at things from a much more elevated perspective. What my clients, what my leaders were struggling with was they didn't quite yet feel like they were that strategic, insightful, helicopter view person. So they clung on to what was familiar. They dove into the trenches and started meddling with the things that they were assigning, as opposed to learning to actually let go. So what we found in a lot of conversations was that what needed to happen was starting to have practice at being that person that is strategic, being that person that can see things with a much wider lens. And it was really giving themselves the grace to not be perfect. And that was a big struggle with many clients, and continues to be with many clients. They got into their leadership positions because they had been very, very good at what they were doing. And now we're saying, yeah, but now you're not going to be very good for a while. And it was, letting go and allowing themselves to be vulnerable and realize that people would be there to support if they were vulnerable, but they had to let go a little bit. So
I want to jump in just listen to what you said there, this idea of around expertise. And you're in your position because you're an expert, and you might have to let go of some of that expertise to delegate to other people, to allow people to have as much knowledge as yourself, and the vulnerability that's involved in that. I think I'm hearing you, but I'm also thinking in the current climate, a lot of people are generally feeling vulnerable, aren't they?
Absolutely, yes. It's everybody says our jobs have months left. AI is going to take them all over. So yes, people are feeling vulnerable. But I think if we sort of all of us take a wider view, we realize that once one does start to step back, there's always a different opportunity. There's a different way to add value and usually it's a way that allows for even more growth and more learning and more, interest, more passion. Whereas hanging on to the past can sometimes, close one off and create that defensive nature, which then, trickles down to the rest of the team. And we get this unhelpful vicious cycle of everybody, trying to struggle over, something small, whereas there's a lot much more to be had. So yeah, it's, the conversations that I typically end up having tend to and end up with okay, yes, it's scary, but they can try particular situations where you usually pick up a situation, a person, a task that they can let go of, and a new task that they can pick up, or a new responsibility that they can pick up now that they've let go of something. And session by session, it's building little blocks. So actually, 6 months later, I look back and think, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. It's not overnight, but the conversations and being in a space where they can be vulnerable, because coaching by its nature is confidential, it's non-judgmental, and it allows them to talk and explore and really think, what would that feel like? What would that feel like? And that's where that breakthrough happens.
So thank you very much. I'm hearing be experimental, try something different, be open. It might not work, but you'll learn from it, and that's really important. I also know you've written about leaders pushing pressure down into their teams. That attitude of just make it work, find a way, just get it done. So that is a form of delegation, but I'm curious. I don't think it's the best type of delegation. So how do you break that cycle?
A form of delegation, isn't it? Because you're asking people to do it, but you're perhaps not giving the support that needs to be wrapped around asking people to do things. And this usually happens when there's pressure from the top, or from perhaps outside in one's home life, and therefore empathy disappears and care disappears. It's all about, well, just do it, and I don't care how you get through it. In a lot of organizations where that sort of approach happens, it's a cultural thing that's coming from the top. And that's where it needs to be tackled. It has to be tackled at the top. Those leaders, those very senior leaders, have to be intentional about exploring the impact of their attitudes and their behaviors on the teams they lead. They have to be ready to understand what's creating that pressure in their lives. Maybe it's nothing to do with work. Maybe it's external. Maybe it's health related. Who knows what it is? But understanding where that pressure is coming from and starting to dismantle that will mean that they can be a calmer individual, be a more open individual, be a more vulnerable individual with their wider teams, with their subordinates, and it spills over. And ironically, a lot of the clients I've worked with where we've had these sorts of conversations, they've reported that it's not just about work that changes, it's their whole lives that change. It's their relationships with their children, their relationships with their parents, their spouses, their friends, all of it changes, not just how they show up in the workplace. And they're usually delighted. I can't hear you, Jenny.
Yeah, I was just pressing it. You're drawing quite a lot on the home life, which is very interesting. You're saying, the reason why someone might be delegating in this way might be other things happening. And it's quite interesting to consider that. There's a lot of people who perhaps think that you just go into work, you're a different, you're a work person versus a home person. But I'm hearing quite strongly in your coaching approach, it's like you're a whole person. And as a result, some things might be happening in different places. I guess there's also something that's coming to mind, and maybe we'll explore it later on, but this sense of agency. So if my organization doesn't have leaders who lead in the way that I want to lead, can I possibly lead differently? If I have leaders who poorly delegate to me, do I have to poorly delegate on? And I think that's an interesting question, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I love the word agency. And sometimes, people will say, well, nobody's, treating me right, why should I bother? But somebody has to take that first step. So if you know you can do better, and it means therefore leading up as well as down, obviously. But then yes, you are the one that will take that first step and demonstrate what it looks like, demonstrate what you would like from your leaders, as well as demonstrate to your subordinates what you expect from them. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Sahini's been sitting quietly, patiently listening. So it would be great to hear from you. So Sahini, you're a positive psychology coach. You work with leaders and teams, and you talk about helping leaders bring out the best in others. Now, there's a big difference between delegation that just offloads tasks and delegation that actually grows people. Can you help us understand that distinction? How does coaching help a leader shift from, I need to get this off my plate, to, I'm going to use this as a developmental opportunity?
Yeah, the key word there for me, Jenny, is shift. Right? It's a reframe and a shift from being the head of the team just to like dish out jobs to being a leader who is there to align people's strengths, their skills, their ambitions, even with the tasks and the mission at hand. And already that sounds like a lot, right? And it's complex, it takes time and relational energy to achieve, which is why we have leaders to do that role. I think sometimes people think that it's quite easy to be a leader and to be the one to say, okay, who does what? But actually, there's, as I've been trying to say, there's a lot of nuance in that. There's a lot of skill and capacity building in that as well. So on the one hand, offloading tasks is just seeing the work that needs to get done. Whereas with delegation that develops people, it's actually seeing the work to be done and the people and how you can achieve that work collectively in the most effective way. So from a strengths perspective, it means that we need to get to know the people in our teams, right? It means becoming a strength spotter. So when I engage with a client for the first time, I always ask, what are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? What energizes you? What are the things that you do really well and with ease? And these are questions that surface people's strengths. Very often, actually, people are stumped or they find it difficult to identify that in themselves or have the language to express that. Now, some people might might know it, but find it difficult or awkward to share and speak about it. But I think that if you find it difficult to answer that question for yourself, then it's going to be really difficult to spot that in others. And this is such a key skill in leadership, right? So when people when my clients bring a question around delegation or a problem around delegation, I like to ask about what is the story that you're telling yourself about this person's potential or the potential in your team. And then we can get really curious about asking those strengths-based questions, like, what do you observe in your team? What do people do really well? Where are they like putting their hands up to take on certain kind of tasks? What are they saying in their kind of development conversations in general? So
Yeah.
in fact,
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to share that I think something you've said is so important, which is find the strengths in yourself before you can find them in others. And actually that can be really hard to do. And I think a coach, if I think about me finding my own strengths as I've gone through my life and my work experience, it's been in coaching conversations where a coach has held up a mirror to me and said, I hear you saying this, I hear you're doing that. Isn't that amazing? Whereas I might have swept it under the carpet and not realized it myself. So I just wanted to share that for me, it's coaching conversations where those strengths have really come to the fore for me.
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny. And you'll know, and Ola will know as well from your own coaching practices, that even 10 minutes of conversation with someone, you can see what their strengths are, because they, it's about the things that they say and how energized they feel, or they show up when they speak about certain topics. There are so many clues in our conversations. And I think as a coach, we're really good at kind of seeing that or spotting that in others. Yeah,
Absolutely. Sorry, I probably stopped your flow there. So I'm going to jump a bit to a question, and then you can always come back to more you wanted to say on the last question. So what about when the leaders don't trust that the work will get done properly? How do you help them work through that? I think it's a really common problem. There isn't that sense of, will it get done on time? Will it come back to me? And without that trust, it's hard.
Yeah, and I think Ola spoke a bit about this as well, because there's a fear related, it's fear related as well, right? Yeah. So when this kind of question comes up, I like to gently ask, is this trust issue about this person, or is it about control? Sometimes it's both, right? But we need to kind of untangle this. If it's genuinely about capability, that's useful data. Then it allows us to explore in the coaching space what leaders can do to understand the capabilities in their teams better. What kind of questions that they can ask, what kind of strengths-based assessments. Assessment is not the right word, but those kind of psychometrics or ways of finding out or surfacing the strengths of people. It also means spending more time with the people in your team. You need to kind of test out this question of trust. You might have assumed a gap on capability without giving a person the chance to close it, or without giving yourself a chance to understand what that gap is. With control, that's a bit more tricky to unpick, and it requires more work together as coach and client. Now, I would be curious as to where the need of control comes from. Both of you mentioned this thing about our biographies and our social identities playing a part in that. There's some useful insights and clues to our relationship with control. I think with working with a lot of global majority women as well, who are very committed to empowering their teams, but they struggle with micromanaging sometimes. And we know that some of that has to do with the systems that we operate in, right? We've worked twice as hard to get to this position. And then sometimes you feel like you can't put a foot wrong because your role or your reputation will be at stake. And so now you have this perception or this belief that you need to do everything perfectly, and that means that you should do it. So it's those kind of historical narratives and stereotypes that can trap us and hold us hostage, and we want to explore that as coach and client. But what I try to do is help leaders to build that trust incrementally with their team members. Like Ola was saying, small handovers first, clear agreements about check-in points, not to micromanage, but so the leader doesn't lie awake worrying, and then also a debriefing afterwards. Not just did it go well, but what did you learn? What did you do differently? And so that's where the development actually happens.
Thank you so much. I'm clearly hearing from you that the job of the leader is to make sure that they know their people well. And to know your people well, you may have to start with getting to know yourself well, but also not to come from a place of critique, but to come from a place of strength, because that's where our resources are, our energy are, that's where, when we work from that place, we can do our best work. So that feels very, very central to what you do. So thank you very much, both of you, giving two really interesting perspectives on this. But I want to move on to my third question, and I'm back to you, Ola. So you help leaders who want to use a coaching approach with their teams. So let's talk about building coaching culture. I think as coaches here, we think every culture should be a coaching one, where people can step up without being, being asked. They just do it. I think that's the dream for us as coaches. We want this coaching world, but it's the dream for a lot of leaders as well. But what does that actually look like in practice? And how does coaching help a leader create that environment rather than one where everyone's waiting to be told what to do? So this is very much about not just an individual, it's more about how we're creating a culture where people behave like this. And it very much aligns with that question we were talking about right at the beginning, which is actually these, if we don't have a coaching culture in our organization, can we create one for our teams? So over to you with that big question, Ola.
Fab. Okay. Yeah. I think, when we start talking about culture and the culture where people want to take ownership, want to be creative, want to contribute, the word that comes to my mind is trust. The other thing that comes to mind is psychological safety. Because at the end of the day, we all have agency. We all want to actually make a difference. We want to create, we want to improve situations, correct mistakes, suggest new approaches. However, in lots of organizations, people hold back. And they hold back because they're not sure that what they offer will be received in the spirit that it's offered. And nobody wants to invite trouble on themselves, so they hold back. Usually, they've seen others being shot down when they've offered suggestions. They've seen the credits being taken when it belongs elsewhere, perhaps lower down in the organization, or they just never see any recognition for previous input. It's all of these little things are the things that turn off committed and interested individuals who would otherwise be delighted, people that want to take ownership, want to do things, want to contribute. And I guess, the question then is, why would the leaders in an organization purposely behave in ways that make their teams shut down? But is it purposefully? Maybe it's not on purpose. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's coming out of the way they were led as they came up through the ranks. And I guess one of the things that we don't not necessarily acknowledge is that the world has changed, and a lot of the sort of very senior people came up in a world where they waited to be told, and in fact they had to wait to be told because that was the way in the Industrial Revolution sort of needed people to behave. People were actually a substitute for machines. They came and did specific things. But now we don't want that anymore. We don't want substitutes for machines. We want people to bring their brains and their thinking and everything. But we're still managing them as if they are substitutes for machines because that's the way we were managed. So it's really learning to examine how we manage and how we are demonstrating the trust that we have in their abilities, in their capabilities, and the fact that actually, yes, there will be mistakes and there'll be opportunity for learning for that individual, for perhaps the whole organization, as a result of such mistakes.
You know, you said so much.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know, actually, I mean, it really speaks to the generational differences in the workplace, doesn't it? The fact that people have different expectations now, depending on which generation you're at. And there's a different psychological contract. You know, at one point, people could start with an organization and they'd have a job for life and have a carriage clock when they left. And now people don't even know if they've got a 1-year contract. You know, we have 0-hour contracts, we have gig economy, and leading those people is different. So I think you're making some really interesting points about, are we leading the way that we were led? Are we leading the way the person wants to be led? Are we leading the way that's appropriate for 2026 as well? And there are many questions that we have to consider in that. And also how it's not, you know, they say treat people not as you want to be treated, as they want to be treated. And I think that is, you know, at the heart of your message, which is how do you get the best out of someone? Not how do you just want to lead them, but how do you get the best out of them? And in this very diverse workforce that you might have.
Absolutely. And as Sohini mentioned earlier on, you know, it's about being able to find out, you know, what their expectations are, what turns them on, what brings that energy to the situation. But a lot of the time, you know, people don't know how to have those conversations. You know, it's very transactional, it's very task focused. It's not necessarily about the person, it's about the job. And until you combine both, it's hard for that trust to develop, and therefore that complete, you know, contribution to be there.
I think as well that in terms of we think about coaching conversation, the space with a coach can give you the time to think that through. You know, I think that's the really important aspect, that you might know at the back of your mind there's a problem, but you're not doing anything about it, or you're just getting irritated. And then you take the time to bring this to a coaching conversation, and you can actually come up with some resolution or some action or something to try that's different to what you've always been doing. But I've got a challenge back for you, really. You know, what about when someone on the team doesn't step up? You think you're a great leader. You are delegating. You're not holding on to it. You're not trying to take control. You are very happy to delegate. Maybe you've even, you know, spent a lot of time thinking about their strengths. But actually, they keep coming back with questions. They need constant reassurance. You know, how can you coach that person?
Yeah, you know, delegation is an art. It needs to be practiced, and not everybody accepts it as quickly. But there's a few things that are quite important when one delegates. It's really about, you know, things like expectation, things like feedback, things like communication. And I know, Sohini, you've mentioned a few of those. You know, in terms of expectations, have you been clear in words that this individual understands about what the outcomes need to look like? So not necessarily about, well, you need to do this thing, then that thing, then that thing, but what does the outcome look like at the end? So that the person that you're working with knows where they need to get to, and when do I want that outcome, and, you know, and how she, you know, so being clear about that outcome. It means that the individual has a little bit of space to add their own initiative. And then I think, like Sohini, you mentioned, there's a bit of feedback. There needs to be, you know, some communication in between. You know, if you just let it go and then leave them to it and say, come back when you're done, then, you know, you're not going to be at ease, because you're not quite sure whether they're making progress, and they're not quite at ease because, you know, they're doing it, but they're not sure whether it's going to be right or wrong. So build it in, you know, checkpoints where it's possible to check in and just make sure that they're still aligned, they still understand what it is they're doing. If they've got questions, they can ask them. Them knowing that ability is there, that helps. And finally, on the way it's communicated, a lot of the time, people think that because they're the leader, they need to do all the talking. And they tell this individual, this is how you need to do it, this is when I need to do it, and they don't ask them, in terms of, the person explaining what it is they understand, the person even asking questions, and until you let the other party really be open about where they're at, what they understand, where their questions are, you really haven't allowed them to do their best work. So those are the sorts of things I would check in with my clients on to say, okay, so, how have you been? And then we can talk about the capacity or capability of the individual and what else we can do to support the capability of the individual, if that is really where the difficulty is.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I also just want to acknowledge some of the people in the chat. Marsha, Dixon, Terry, great to have you here. Glad you're enjoying the questions and that they resonate with you. Dr. Jennifer Abaseki, yes, you recognize possible micromanaging, but you've also talked about culture of mothering, disappointment, negative experiences, combined with a sprinkle of imposter syndrome could be why people are not delegating, why people are not managing upwards, why this isn't happening. And actually what we're saying is really resonating with Maynaz. It's lovely to see you, Maynaz. Glad you're here. So Maynaz has come to a new store. I know she works with a big retailer, and she's taken that step back to enable others to step up. And I love that. So, and she's coaching her team. So I think this is very much resonating as well with our audience. Thank you. Thank you both. So Sohini, back to you. Your website, I've been gleaning your website, searching it, which is a fantastic website. Yeah, it says that there's a collective wisdom and collaborative potential in every team that leaders can tap into, and that they don't have to do it all themselves. When we're thinking about it in the context that you're sharing it, what does leading like a coach actually mean? And how does working with a coach help a leader make that shift from being the person with all the answers to being a person who helps their team find the answers? And it's a really important one.
Yeah, what a lovely question. Leading like a coach can sound a bit abstract, I think. So let me try and make it concrete. It's not being a coach, but it's about asking better questions. And like Ola was saying, asking more questions than you give answers. It's worth saying that the quality of your questions can transform your relationships and your thinking. And I think that's why the coaching space, it can be so magical. Actually, the questions that we ask creates such good thinking. Our clients' best thinking comes forward. They've given that space, and they're able to see different perspectives from just a simple question. A lot of leaders that I work with became leaders because they were brilliant, like Ola was saying, because they were experts. They're good at solving problems. That's why they got promoted. But actually, it's about developing other people's problem-solving capacity, about developing other people's expertise when you get into the role of leadership. And they miss that. And so we help them to maybe rediscover that, because they can't keep doing the thing that made them successful in the previous role, which is having the answer, or just doing it because it's easy for them. Because what happens is that it perpetuates pattern of the team coming to them for everything and for having all the answers. Now, it's obviously a great ego boost when you have all the answers, but it's not effective teaming, right? The kind of world that we live in now means, I mean, there's so much unpredictability. And with AI, we can't possibly compete on the knowledge front. So, what are we bringing as leaders? And I think that a leader as a coach means that you're bringing your observational skills, your reflection skills, your relational skills, and your wisdom to the forefront. And when we work together in the coaching space, then we explore that. You know, we're asking questions about what do you know about your team? How did it go when you handed over a task that felt quite difficult to hand over to someone? What did you learn from that? And most importantly, it's getting really comfortable with not having the answers. And that discomfort is a great thing to explore with a coach, because we can hold that and you can get to feel what it and sit in that emotion of discomfort. Often, when we ask a question in the coaching space and the client doesn't know the answer immediately, uh, you can already sense the discomfort, and it's really cool to lean into that and to just pause there. And I think it helps the leader develop that ability to hold that pause between when someone brings them a problem and going straight to immediately solving it. You're creating that space, and that can change everything. You can start to ask those brilliant questions, and then you're actually leading, and you're not being an answering machine.
I think what you've just said is absolute gold, Sohini. I really do. I really do. I think as a society, we are losing that ability to sit in discomfort. And it's a quality, it's a skill, and it's something a coach can really help you with. I have to sit with a difficult issue. I have to sit with how this feels in my body, and I have to work out what is actually happening here, rather than maybe lurching from one thing to another without really understanding what's going on for you. And a coaching space is such a safe space. Because your coach will not be reporting back to your organization unless you've contracted in a three-way contract for something to be recorded back to your organization. You are in that safer space. You're not burdening a family member who probably has a lot of other stuff on their plate and is not really qualified to help you. A coach sits in that professional space. They don't have to have all the answers, and they can guide you through that discomfort. And that's not that we're going to come up with the answer for you or solve it for you. We're going to help you through it. So I love how you came to that place. And those who have joined us today probably were not expecting that to come up, but it is so key. So just a very quick question, because I want to go on to a question from an audience member, Lavon, but I know that you work in high pressure, complex, multicultural contexts, Sohini. Does this approach work even when the pressure is intense and the timelines are tight? Because I know that's what people will be thinking. This all sounds great when you've got all the time in the world to smell the roses and, have lunch with everyone, but I'm under deadlines here. So can it work in that situation when it's really difficult?
Yeah, of course. I think the assumption is that the coaching style leadership is a luxury for these calm moments, like you're saying, over lunch. But actually, when you've internalized the approach, you can be more effective under pressure. Because then you're not the bottleneck as well. You've built a team that can act, a team that everyone knows who's good at what, a team that knows who enjoys doing certain tasks, and a team that feels emboldened to act under pressure instead of feeling shaky or needing the leader's approval. I think what happens is that sometimes when we act impulsively under pressure, we end up trying to solve the wrong problem. Whereas if we just take a moment to understand what the real challenge is when someone comes to you with a problem under pressure, and just take the time to ask those kind of thoughtful questions. And I have to say, like, very rarely do we not actually have that time for thoughtful coaching conversations. I think that organizations are often guilty of like creating false sense of urgency around things. And so I think, from your position of leadership, you have to like lean into that and to understand, um, what would it cost you to take 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to really understand what the problem is, to decide what to do next. And that route to clarity and decisiveness is building that muscle of slowing down, to listen and to look at what's actually happening. And the leader, as a coach, builds that culture that Ola was talking about, where people know their own authority, they can trust their own judgment, and then we can deal with the emergencies much faster.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I want to go on to 2 questions from Lavon, actually. And so you might want to just note it down because there are 2 of them. So the first one is, how do you navigate differently having the industrial age management style being imposed by your manager when your own management style is more modern and collaborative? Last week I was told I need to do this. I need to do as I'm told when explaining my own and my team's capacity. So that's number one. Someone being, their leader has a very different style to their own, and they're being told to do as they're told. And the second part of the question, how would you go into applying these methods upwards? So, what we were describing, coaching, taking a coaching approach, sitting in discomfort. For example, can your team, your team are forward thinkers and have answers. However, management is stuck in industrial age. So it's the same question, really, said in different ways. You have a very different style to your leader. You want to lead in a more modern way. They are quite old school. So whoever wants to start on that question.
Happy to start. I think some of this really is about agency. The question comes from a perspective of, I can't until I'm allowed to. Actually, you can, and the results will speak for themselves. But until you internalize that, and sometimes, being able to have a conversation with your coach about what that could look like, and how you could actually do this in a way that is safe for the organization. Because at the end of the day, we're not running rogue, but we are doing things because we want to progress the organization, and we strongly feel that actually what we're being told is not working or is not going to work, and we've got a different way. So we do that different way. And that's agency, that's real agency. And it's exactly, I think it's exactly what your initial question was how do you create that culture? Somebody has to take the first step. You, with your vision, asking the question, can take that first step. Otherwise, you'll be forever standing and watching and waiting.
I'll just jump in quickly there. What tender stuff to bring to the coaching space, right? Because when you said those words, do as they're told, Jenny, I had a visceral reaction to that. So I think that those are the kinds of things that is so good for the coaching space to explore. Actually, what are your first reactions? How does it make you feel? And then what do you want to do with that? Because that, like, those strong emotions that come up, that's really good data. That's telling you that there's something there that you care about. And so putting it into perspective of how the role that you play, like what Ola was talking about, the agency, the role that you play in creating the kind of culture that your team can thrive in, that the organization wants to move towards. And it's hard work, right? Because you're pushing against that established status quo and these systems that are quite difficult to dismantle. And so you need a partner, and that's where a coach comes in, right? Just like understanding what the risks are involved, how would you approach it, what are the kinds of conversations that you can have, and who can support you in that as well. You don't have to go and take on these difficult emotional situations on your own. And with a coach, we can help to uncover and discover what kind of support you need.
Thank you so much. That's, yeah, really good advice there. I think it's I just want to acknowledge, really difficult situation, especially if you're in quite a hierarchical organization, where it's really difficult to share with someone a different perspective. And I also want to say, we've talked about holistic, well-being today, acknowledging if this is taking a toll on you personally as well. Sometimes we stay too long in environments that don't appreciate us, and it means that it takes a long time to recover and bounce back. And sometimes we end up taking things that are not as good. So sometimes we get to that, we let ourselves get to the point where we just want out, and we end up taking a step backwards. And I hope that's not where you haven't got to that point. But I definitely have had clients who are sort of, I just need to get out of here. I will take anything to be out of this environment where I'm unappreciated. And it means they go back in their career. I encourage you not to do that. To find your allies, to work with a coach in order to move yourself forward, or sometimes out, because we can try and influence. Sometimes it's also not the environment. What do they say? A flower in the wrong place is a weed. And so it's important to know, if you are being seen as a weed, even though you're a wonderful flower, that somewhere else will appreciate how beautiful you are. Just my little thoughts on that as well. So we're coming already to the end of this session. It's been full, it's been rich, it's been amazing. Exactly what I expected from conversations with Suhini and Ola. As you can hear, they have so much depth of knowledge as coaches, and they've given us so much as well. I wonder if I could ask you both in maybe 30 seconds, if someone watching today was thinking, I need to let go more, but I don't know where to start. What's the quick thing that they could do differently this week? One small shift that they could start to change the dynamic within their team. And I'm starting with you, Suhini.
Yeah, one thing, stop answering the first question that someone brings you. And you can practice this at home as well with your partner or your children or whoever. Just pause. Ask them what they think first. What have they tried? It takes 30 seconds. But over time, it completely changes the relationship that you have with your team and their own capability. And soon they will stop just outsourcing their thinking to you, and they're going to start trusting themselves. And that is where things begin to change.
Fabulous. Thank you. And Ola? Oh, I can't hear you for some reason. Oh, it's right, I hear you now.
You can hear me. Okay, good. I was just saying, so he said exactly what I was going to say. But one other thing that you could do is, if there are particular things that you were thinking about jumping in with, then sort of in the morning before work, before you really dive into work, just think about, okay, what have I got on my list, and what are the things that are really mine versus things that actually somebody else could be doing. So have that clear separation in your mind.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been a wonderful session. There was one extra question in the chat, which we won't get to today, but I do recommend, Martika, just reach out to each of us. You've got our LinkedIn, and we'll try and answer your question, because I don't want to leave you hanging. But a huge thank you to Sahini, a huge thank you to Ola. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you for those who listened and contributed as well. And I hope you're leaving with something that you can try. If you're interested in working with either of these coaches or finding more about the Diverse Executive Coach Directory and the work that I do, please do get in touch. Our website is diverseexecutivecoaches.co.uk. It will be in the chat. We have more in the series, so do look out for them, and join our next event. We have them once a month, and we've also got a survey in the chat as well. So please do keep joining us. Each event is already listed on the Diverse Executive Coach Directory LinkedIn, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you very much, everyone. See you next time. Bye.